All right. Well, I feel like the first two presenters kind of led into my discussion fairly easily, so this will be pretty easy and pretty quick. So I'm a big college football fan, so everything that I do, every life event that happens, I try to find a parallel in college football. So some of you may know, some of you may not know, this is Nick Saban, the head football coach at the University of Alabama, and he will go down as one of, if not the greatest college football coach of all time. This is Les Miles. He was a great coach in his time, but he will not go down as the greatest college football coach at all time. He won't even be in the discussion. And here's why. Les Miles had the inability to adjust his gameplay calling, his coaching philosophy, and he could not beat this guy. And if you look at the two programs, LSU and Alabama, they're both fantastic programs. They have access to some of the premier athletes, so there's no difference in terms of talent. They have crazy fan bases, so fandemonium is at an all-time high at both universities. So the big difference between the two coaches is their philosophy, right? Les Miles' philosophy was always, we're going to run the football and make sure that the other team cannot run the football. And it worked. It actually won him a national championship. 2 national championship appearances. The other one that he lost was, oddly enough, to this guy, Nick Saban. And using his philosophy, it went from, I'm a great coach, to mediocrity, and then ultimately his firing. He was fired because he could not produce. Teams started to adjust. He couldn't defend running the football anymore because now teams were passing the football. Nick Saban's philosophy was trust the process. Trust the process, what that means is we're going to evolve and adapt from one play to the next, one season to the next, and those decisions impacted not only his play calling, but his staffing decisions, what types of athletes he wanted to recruit. And this is why over the past decade, Nick Saban in the University of Alabama, I'm a little biased because I went there, but Nick Saban in the University of Alabama will always be in the conversation for the best college football program in the country. So why are we talking about football? I'm from the South, we're in Colorado, this is the Ascend Analytics Summit. Why are we talking about college football? It's because the recipe for sustained success in college football is very similar to the recipe for sustained success in terms of system planning and portfolio optimization when it comes to our fleet. So if we look here, right, these guys down in Texas, they're saying 70%, there'll be 70% renewables in the next 3 years, right? They're adjusting. Same here, 65% renewables by 2023. Adjustments. 80% of retail load will be by when? Adjusting. Here, we will invest $950 million in scrubbers to keep our coal plants alive. If I'm an LSU fan, at this point, I'm screaming at the TV, let's pass the football, right? These are good guys, but if just political issues were the only thing that we were concerned about, then yeah, maybe. But the game is changing. I want you to pay attention just to the purple circles. You look at the purple circles, it tells you in the wind corridor, basically an historical account of the price of wind PPAs on a $1 per megawatt basis. Look, you see, all right, well, wind PPA prices are at an all-time low, right? Those are market forces that are driving that. These are market forces that are changing the game, not just political. And as these market forces and market dynamics are beginning to change, so does the thinking of the utility. We go over, is this thing working? Oh, just go old school. Here we go. Let me go back one. No, that's fine. Here we go. So we look here at the Gibbons Creek coal plant in Texas in 2006. You look at the way the plant is running, it looks pretty good. Not a whole bunch of volatility around the dispatch profile, not really exaggerated outage periods. But if you think about the environment back in 2006, there wasn't a whole bunch of wind penetration. There wasn't, the gas environment was a little bit different. Gas prices were a lot higher. So gas prices being a lot higher, renewables, less intermittency on the system, what that translates into is, you know, coal is king because it's going to be dispatched before gas. Now, you fast forward to 2016, now you have more intermittency and you have a lower gas environment. So in the lower gas environment, what we're going to see is now coal is being pushed in merit closer to the margin. So as coal moves closer to the margin and you have more intermittency on the system, you start to see all types of volatility around the dispatch profile. Extended periods of outage, more time sitting at a minimum, and also you're going to see, you know, these extended outage periods. These are to avoid costs of maintenance overruns because, you know, these coal plants aren't built to run like this. They're not built to regulate. They're built to come on and stay on. We see the same thing in Iowa. The same type of story here. You know, more exaggerated outage periods, more volatility in terms of their dispatching. Same in Nebraska. Nebraska is a little bit different, right? Because in Nebraska, there's not as much wind generation. Man, this is crazy. There's not as much wind generation, but they're in a market that's flooded with wind. So market dynamics are actually impacting their dispatch in 2016 because you can buy so much cheap energy off the market. Now there's some utilities like what we showed before that are kind of trusting the process and they're starting to evolve and adjust their thinking, and we're seeing that here in Denton. Denton, right in 2016, 30%, and this is all public information by the way, 2016, 30% of their fleet was coal. 30% market purchases, and the additional 40% was renewable generation. Now, in order to adjust and evolve, we're looking at in 2019, 70% of their fleet is going to be renewable, 17% market purchase, and then 13% flexible gas generation to help optimize their fleet. So we talk about trusting the process and looking at the market dynamics and understanding trends and adjusting our thinking throughout. What we're seeing now is basically renewables are the new base load. And the more renewables that hit the system, what you've seen in the previous charts is there's going to be more intermittency. More intermittency and more markets are going to give you more market volatility. So if you take renewables as a new base load plus market volatility will increase as a result of intermittency, the only way you can win in this type of environment is to have flexible gas generation to help optimize and smooth some of those jagged edges. The Brattle Group also supports this finding. They actually did a study for the Denton case, and they looked at 3 different portfolios: a pure market strategy where they got all of their generation from the market, the status quo, basically the split that I showed for 2016, and then the flexible gas strategy. And the flexible gas strategy, not surprising to us, for the next 20 years actually yields the greatest amount of savings. If you look over here and you compare the flexible gas strategy to the status quo, we're looking at $750 million of savings over 20 years versus just a market-based portfolio, $975 million of savings per year. The Brattle Group also evaluated this using 3 different gas scenarios. And what they found was that, what in the world? What they found was that the renewable baseload strategy actually, not only did it yield the most savings, it also had the lowest risk profile as you compare to the coal, the combined cycle, and the market portfolios. Can you see mine your way?
Yes, sir. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So a colleague of mine, Mati Radkivi, he wrote a book, Goodbye to Dairyland. And if you want to see more of this type of analysis, I think Phil back there, Phil has a few books, and if he doesn't have enough for everybody, I'll show my email at the end of this, and I'll get some for you. Mati wrote this book, and what it does is it chronicles one utility's evolution of thinking about how they need to approach baseload generation as well as renewables. So it's a fantastic read. Maybe after this presentation, I'll be on the New York Times bestsellers list because I'll write a book, but that's to come in the future. So let's change gears a little bit. I'm kind of speeding through this because I don't want to be in between you and the break. But so we talked about what we saw in the wind corridor, some of the things that we have observed in some business cases. But now this is actually some experimental modeling that I've done over the past few months. So what we did was we started taking a few IRPs and doing some experimental modeling, and this is what we found. So here in El Paso, these guys said, hey, we need new gas baseload type of generation. So these are the modeling assumptions. We can talk offline about that. I want to kind of speed through this, but in a nutshell, these guys needed 370 megawatts of baseload generation. So what we did is we modeled their system and we looked at dispatch curves, and what we see here is the dispatch for a high demand week, a peaking week. And you know what? It's an engineer's dream. If you look, of course, your nuclear is running all out, the new combined cycle is running all out, no starts and stops. But what I want you to pay attention to is just how well the solar profile corresponds with the peak. Right? And this is the base case of high demand week. What happens when we go into the shoulder and we start to look at low demand weeks? Look at the way the combined cycle is coming off. It shuts down. What that tells us is that the combined cycle for 370 megawatts of baseload generation is too big to fit the merit. Right? It costs every time you shut those things off and bring it back on, and you ramp up and down. So these guys, they don't fit the merit. So what we thought was, well, what happens if at any point there should be an increase in solar penetration in this area? You can't put more solar here because you're locked in with the combined cycle. So we studied, and we said, okay, well, let's look at it a few different ways. We're going to put some of our flexible capacity in, and we're going to play with different levels of solar generation to meet the 370 megawatt need. So again, you look at the peak demand week. Nothing surprising here. I mean, really, really good dispatch throughout. Again, pay attention to how well the solar peaks, how well the solar profile corresponds with the peaks. Then we go to the low demand week. And what we see here is that with flexible gas, we're able to both provide energy and reserves when there are higher amounts of solar penetration on the system. And a lot of that is because with recip engines, the ability to be able to shut down to 10% of your nameplate capacity to provide reserves is a game changer. And that's what we're seeing here. So then we tallied it all up. And what we did was, okay, well, let's do it with 200 megawatts of solar. Let's do it with 250, and then let's do it with 300. What we see is of course, with 300 megawatts of solar PV plus internal combustion engines, in all three, the low, medium, and high gas scenarios, we have a savings of between 8.2% to 9.3% when compared to the base case. 8.2% might not seem like very much, but when you're talking about billions of dollars over 20 years, it's a pretty substantial savings going back to the ratepayer. And again, this is just a comparison of the different cases the different solar penetration cases with recip engines. And of course, what you can see is in every scenario where there's a higher concentration of solar power that will yield more savings. But we did another study. We did another study in New Mexico, P&M. These guys, they understood it. They said that the combined cycle is not competitive. We need something a little bit more flexible. Look at where they are in terms of New Mexico, where P&M is. They're in an area in New Mexico where probably they get the highest, some of the highest levels of solar penetration of anywhere else in the country. So they get it. Kind of comb through their IRP. Here's a few highlights. Replacing the coal supply with renewable energy and more flexible generators will save money for customers in the long term. Key takeaway here, P&M tested both 250 and 500 megawatt size CCs at different costs to find the price at which they would be selected, which were $338 per kilowatt and $170 per kilowatt respectively. Less than a third or a quarter of current cost estimates. It's pretty big. So we did the same thing. We examined the base case. We also came up with different scenarios that we modeled with different levels of solar penetration and combination of recip engines. So I'm going to kind of blow through this really quick because I have 1 minute, right? So here is just a graph of how their fleet stacks up, and then we have our high resolution, our high energy solution, where we basically flooded the system with more solar penetration and wind penetration and our recip engines, and basically here's the breakdown. The base case, they went at 1% of internal combustion and then 25% combined cycles. They went at 21% of combustion turbines, 14% wind. So what we did was we said, okay, let's go 18% internal combustion engines, 16% solar, and 16% wind, and let's look at what happens. So here's the base case. Same story, same playbook. Base case 2035, a high demand week. Again, it looks good, the engineer's dream. High demand week in this area, your combined cycle is running wide open. That's exactly what you want to see. High resolution case, same thing. You had the new build combustion engines running all out. Solar looks really good. But here's where things get interesting. In the high resolution, in the high res case for 2035, you look here, the CCs only run at night. And when they come off, the engines, they go down to very low levels to provide energy and reserves. And look at how much solar and wind are able to produce energy. This is all value. What we see here is with the optimal portfolio, the high res portfolio, we're looking at a 6% system level savings, again, over 20 years. We're talking a lot of money, so 6%, that's a lot of value back to the ratepayer. About an 18% reduction in water usage, which that's a lot of water as well, right? And then about a 16% reduction in CO2 emissions. So this is a lot of value both to the ratepayer, and it's also attractive for public service commissions. That's all I have, and you guys can ask questions. Here's my email if you guys want a copy of the book or just to say, hey, drop me a line. Any questions?
What size engines were you modeling? The Wartsila engines?
Ooh, those were 18 SGs, so 18 megawatt engines.
18 megawatt engines.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were comparing that to what the large combined cycle.
Combined cycle, yep.
Okay, thanks.
You guys are pretty easy. No other questions?
When superseding limits or, you know, so I'm an electrical, not mechanical, but I know when you run a recip or any engine below 50, 30%, you start to get into issues with exhaust. And
Off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you that, but I could send a few emails and I can get you an answer.
okay.
Yep. Yep.
How do the heat rates compare of your ICEs versus top-of-the-line CCGT?
It depends, right? So if you're looking at you know, at what load level, right? So if you're looking at, you know, our minimum stable load is 10%, right? So if we're able to keep, you know, an 8 heat rate dropping down to 10%, you know, that's definitely not in line with the combined cycle. But I think running at full load, the combined cycle will probably have about a 6 heat rate. We'll still be at about 8.